when I first got into Warhammer, it wasn't uncommon to still see goblin green base rims and flock used for basing. So when static grass tufts first arrived to the hobby, it was like the iPhone being released. Just super cool and contemporary and really realistic when compared to what else was available at the time. And I still have a huge soft spot in my heart for those dark colored base rims instead of black, but something that has lost its shine for me are those static grass tufts. And don't get me wrong, I still love them, even when they're placed all over a model, giving them a sort of mossy and overgrown look. But I can't help but feel like when I see them, the first thing I think is, that's a static grass tuft, instead of seeing the basing as a bit of scenery. I think this is mostly just fatigue. They've been a staple in the hobby for a while now, and I think we're just super used to them. On the flip side, something that really caught my eye recently is more grass tufts, but ones that are both smaller and shorter, and I decided to try them out. I'm not sure how I've never seen these before, but overall, I'm really liking them. They seem more realistically sized, and there's like a million in each package. I really like the smaller footprint, making them a little easier and really fun to place, wedging them into where you want them to go, or clumping them together into a fun, organic shape. They're also adhesive, but I used a bit of glue to make sure that they're really stuck in place. They really tuck into a textured base, blending right in, flush to the base, which is actually a huge plus. These seem really great and I'm super charmed by them, but at the end of the day, they're mostly just shorter grass tufts, so I wanted to see if I could just modify the existing larger ones. I stuck some to my paint handle and tried to give them a trim, but it actually proved way trickier than I imagined, mostly since the tufts wanted to stick to my fingers and thumbnail way more than the paint handle, and I figured it would be easier to do this before gluing them to the model. This is one of those things where I felt super smart when I thought of it, but it quickly turned into me wondering, what am I really doing with my life? But I think it totally worked. Despite the more windswept look of these tufts, cutting them down definitely did the trick. They were looking pretty nice, except for that perfectly circular and chunky base on them. Typically, these aren't the most seamless addition to bases, and I've sort of struggled with the look. That clear little adhesive base or foot sort of sticking out, especially when compared to these newer, smaller tufts, which seem to have a thinner attachment point or just better hidden. And they also have an irregular shape to them, which sort of helps them blend into the base and look like a bit of scenery instead of something just stuck on there. All in all, I'd probably just rather buy a pack of the tiny tufts rather than go through the trouble of trimming a bunch of them, but it is nice to know that the option is still viable, especially just for variety's sake. And it also made me wonder what other customizations could be done to static grass tufts. Something else I think that sort of falls apart under scrutiny are the flower tufts. While great for scenery or terrain, I think they're a bit oversized on a miniature base and are too easy to focus on, really losing the illusion of a flower and instead just looking like the little pieces of fluff that they are, sort of taking you out of the scale. When looking at actual wildflowers, they always seem so much smaller, especially if compared to the miniatures, so I think scaling these down would do a lot. I'm going to mix up some colors on my palette, mostly warm colors, reds, yellows, oranges, and then some white, and then start dabbing it onto the grass tufts to try to make some flowers. Basically, I'm just picking up a good amount of paint and lightly touching it to the static grass tufts. Really, I just want to get tiny bits of paint on the very ends, hopefully looking like small little wildflowers. And hopefully this smaller scale helps sell the illusion better. I really liked how this was looking and found even greater success in using the paint that was fresh out of the tube. It being thicker, it was able to sit on top of the tuft a bit better and form into little blobs more naturally, which more closely resembled a tiny little flower. I thought this was super fun and I really liked how easy it was. I think you could also really take your time if you wanted to dial it in. And overall, the more sparse look of these compared to the store-bought flowers seemed a little more realistic. But I also just love how this would let me add a couple of flowers in whatever colors I want to spruce up a base. I also wanted to see what else I could do by adding some paint, and especially what I could do about those more obvious bases on the bigger tufts. I first just took some of the color that I used for painting the base right from the tube and used it to cover up that obvious seam as best I could, using the thickness of the paint to also help fill in the little gap where the tuft meets the base. I then also watered it down so it was runny and seeped it into the base of the tuft, running it in between the grass and really tying it into the rest of the ground. And I've primed and painted static grass before, but it was also fun to experiment with getting some paint on these tufts. I just took a tiny bit of paint and worked it into a brush and sort of dry brushed it onto the ends of the tuft. This requires a bit more paint than a typical dry brush, and I found that if I got too much paint on it, just brushing it a bit with my finger worked in the paint and removed the extra, leaving behind some good coverage. I again thought this was a pretty cool way to add some variety to your tufts, allowing you to get some custom colors or even subtle highlights. All in all, I had a ton of fun playing around and seeing what I could do to switch up and customize the static grass tufts, making them feel new and unique again. I think the real star of this, though, is the tiny little tufts. I think they look great, and maybe it's just because, again, they're new to me, but I think it's at least really nice to have the option and variety of lengths and textures on your base. And I'm super glad to have found them. It seems like there's a variety of brands that make them, and I'm glad to have them in my basing repertoire and also some fun ways to improve the standard tufts that I'm now committed to finishing my armies with. Thanks for watching.